She confessed at a birthday dinner to corner me into a public relationship. I rejected her in front of everyone and walked out. When she later saw me with someone else, she lost her mind, and it all ended with a no-contact order and her friends finally turning against her. Hey Reddit! So a woman in my friend group decided we were basically together, confessed publicly to force my hand, and I said nope. Thought that was the end of it? Yeah. No. She spiraled hard. Before I get to that disaster, let me start from the beginning. I'm a senior fire investigator with the County Fire Marshal's office. My job is figuring out what actually started a fire. Not what the story looks like from the outside, not what people say happened, what the evidence says. 8 years doing it, you develop certain habits. One of them is that you document everything, because the person who builds the clean record first controls the timeline. I didn't know I'd be applying that to my personal life this year, but here we are. At the time this started, I was about 3 months into the worst case of my career. A warehouse fire in the industrial corridor killed a security guard and put 2 others in the hospital. One of them lost partial use of his right hand, which I think about more than I probably should. 3 agencies involved. Testimony coming up, my name on the cause and origin determination. I was putting in 10, 12-hour days, going over accelerant patterns, and building a report that was going to get picked apart by people looking for anything to question. My personal life was on pause. That's just how it goes. The friend group I'd been part of for about 4 years, 12, 15 people depending on the season, some from college, some from the neighborhood, people who drifted in through other people and stayed. We did dinners every few weeks, occasional weekend trips. One time we rented a cabin upstate, and it rained literally the entire weekend, and we played cards until 2 a.m. every night. And it was somehow one of the better weekends I'd had in years. Normal group. I liked most of them. Renata had been in the group for 18 months. She came in through a mutual friend and made herself the center of operations faster than I've seen most people manage. She organized everything. Dinners, trips, group events. She tracked everyone's schedules and preferences and ongoing situations, knew who was going through what, who owed who a favor, who responded to which kind of attention. She was the person you texted when you wanted to know if someone was coming. From the outside, that looks like the generous friend who keeps everything running. Looked at a little more carefully, it's someone building a detailed map of how to move people. She knew everything about everyone. That's not warmth, that's infrastructure. I interacted with her the way I interact with most people in the group. Showed up, was polite, kept my actual life pretty private. She'd asked about my work a few times. I answered at a comfortable distance and moved the conversation somewhere else. At some point, she'd apparently decided we were in some kind of slow-building romantic situation. I had not received that memo. I was in the warehouse fire situation. What I was also in, quietly, was something real with a woman named Isla, physical therapist at a sports rehab clinic across town. We'd known each other about 2 years through a mutual friend and had been building something careful and honest for the better part of 6 months. Not official yet. Not because either of us was unsure, but because we're both people who move at a real pace and don't perform relationships before they're ready to be seen. She knew about the case I was buried in. She'd shown up twice during bad stretches with food, left without making anything of it, texted later to make sure I'd actually eaten it. That kind of quiet, practical presence that doesn't ask for credit. Anyone who actually knew me could tell my head was locked on something specific. Renata, for all her information gathering, had missed it, or spotted it, and figured she could outmaneuver it. Either way, she was wrong. The birthday dinner for one of the older guys in the group, it was at a rooftop place downtown. Wait, no. Actually, it was the wine bar on 5th. No, it was the rooftop I remember, because I was wearing the wrong jacket and froze the whole walkover. Anyway, 14 people, decent weather, outdoor seating. I was there because I liked the guy, and I'd wrapped a big chunk of the warehouse report that week and could actually breathe for a few hours. About an hour in, Renata stood up with her glass raised. Everyone went quiet. She talked about the year, about the group, standard toast stuff. I was half listening. The guy next to me had just gotten a new truck and was very into explaining the towing capacity, and I'll be honest, I was giving that conversation more attention than Renata's speech. Then she said, "I'm done being patient. I'm saying it. I like you." Somebody made a sound, like a laugh that didn't commit. It died fast. Her eyes stayed on me, and I'm tired of pretending we don't have something. Joel blinked like he'd just been handed something hot. Renata smiled wider. "So, are we doing this or what?" I set my fork down. "No," I said. Her smile froze. "What? We were never a thing," I said. "I'm buried in a case, and my heart's already with someone else." "Who?" she snapped. I looked at her. "Not your business." Joel cleared his throat like he was about to step in. I picked my fork back up. Congrats again, I said to the birthday guy, and turned to the man next to me. Your daughter make the travel team? Yeah, he said, still kind of staring. She did. Good, I said. That's not easy. Renata lowered her glass slowly and sat down. I stayed through dessert, said my goodbyes, and left. In the parking garage, my phone buzzed twice. Renata. You humiliated me. Renata. Don't play dumb. You know what we have. I typed once. Me. We were never together. I'm not interested. Don't contact me again. Logged the date. Drove home. Bryce texted me at 7 the next morning. Renata had been active in the group chat since 11 p.m. She hadn't come at me directly. Instead, she posted vague, emotionally loaded stuff designed to make people fill in my name without her ever writing it. Some people show you who they really are when it's inconvenient for them. No names, no accusation, just enough for everyone who'd been at that dinner to understand exactly what she was pointing at, while keeping herself clean from any specific claim. By noon, several people had messaged her privately. By mid-afternoon, there was a whole thread in the chat about being there for each other, and Renata was in the center of it, getting warmth and validation, never once saying what had actually happened, which meant she got to control what people imagined without being checkable on any of it. I didn't respond. I had accelerant patterns to review. Bryce updated me over the next several days, and honestly, the picture that came together was more organized than I'd given her credit for. Renata was calling the dinner a public humiliation. Per her version, I'd made a spectacle of rejecting her while performing decency, then refused to explain myself or show any accountability. She was also dropping, with careful repetition, that whoever this mystery woman was, she felt sorry for her. Because clearly I had a pattern. Because clearly I wasn't being honest with someone I claimed to care about. None of that was a lie you could directly refute. That was the whole architecture of it. No specific false statement. Just a consistent version of events that needed my silence to survive. She was betting I'd stay quiet. I did stay quiet. I just wasn't idle. She also ran a sub-campaign I didn't find out about until later. One-on-one calls to individual people in the group, where she was more specific than she dared to be in the chat. Bryce caught wind of it when a mutual friend mentioned Renata had called her and talked for 40 minutes about me, about how I'd been leading her on for over a year, how I clearly wanted something but pulled back the second it got real, how this mystery woman was probably someone I was stringing along the same way. The calls were designed to look like private confiding between friends. They were actually the same script delivered individually, so that by the time anyone compared notes, a consensus had already formed. I'll give her credit for the execution. She was better at this than people gave her credit for. I kept building the warehouse case. I kept logging everything. I told Bryce to hold on to what he'd witnessed at the table. He said he'd had a clear line of sight from 4 seats down and called it the most controlled rejection he'd ever seen. He also told me something I hadn't known. He had screenshots, months worth. Renata in DMs with mutual friends describing a developing situation with a serious man in the group, never naming me but with enough detail that anyone in the group would have mapped it immediately. She'd been constructing this story in public for months. She just hadn't told me I was the main character. He said he was holding everything until he knew if it'd be needed. I told him to keep it organized and that I'd probably need him as a witness. He said he'd already figured that's where this was headed. They'd be needed. The next 10 days were manufactured proximity. Coffee shop, a few days in. She was already inside when I walked in. Oh my God, she said too loud. You come here too? Sometimes, I said. She stepped closer. Can we talk for a minute? No, I said. You can't spare 1 minute? Correct. Her jaw tightened. Is she telling you to act like this? Don't, I said. Don't make this about someone else. We're not doing this. I took my coffee and walked out. Grocery store the following Sunday. She pushed her cart into the aisle like it was an accident. You really are avoiding me, she said. I'm shopping, I said. You rejected me like I was nothing. I rejected you, that's it. You owe me a conversation. I didn't stop moving. You don't get breakup privileges. Every time it happened, I logged the date and location. It kept up for 10 days. Joel, the group's permanent peacemaker, the guy who genuinely believes every conflict has a workable middle ground, caught me near the patio door at a hangout. Hey, he said. Can we talk? You're talking, I said. He exhaled. The group feels weird. She's upset. People don't know what happened. She did that, I said. I'm not saying you did anything, Joel said quickly. I'm saying, maybe acknowledge it, soften it a little. No, it would help. It would help her story, I said. I already gave her a direct answer at the dinner. She feels embarrassed. That's not my problem. My answer is still no. Joel nodded once. Okay, I'm just trying to keep the peace. Keep it, I said. Just don't spend it on me. He was working with incomplete information. He'd update. About 2 weeks in, Nolan started showing up with a particular energy. He'd been loosely attached to the group for a while, knew Renata from somewhere before she joined. He'd always had this specific vibe around me, the kind of guy who needs to be the person people naturally defer to in a room, and who notices when someone isn't competing for that position. I'd never engaged with it. That seemed to bother him more than anything I'd actually done to him. Renata had recruited him the way smart people recruit someone useful, not by asking directly, but by being visibly sad and wronged in his proximity, until he decided defending her was his own idea. Nolan, who'd been into Renata for a while and now saw what he thought was a clear opening, walked right through it. He cornered me at a group dinner about 16 days after the rooftop, not a quiet pull-aside. He positioned himself while people were still eating, for maximum audience. "So that's how you treat women now?" Loud. I kept cutting my food. "What do you want?" "You made Renata look stupid. She staged a public confession in front of 14 people," I said. "I said no. That's the story. You could have handled it better." I looked up for the first time. "Tell her not to audition for relationships in front of an audience." A couple heads turned. Nolan's jaw tightened. "You think you're funny. I think you're confused. This doesn't involve you. It involves decency." I went back to my plate. "Then be decent somewhere else." He tried once more, louder. I didn't look up, finished my plate and left. Bryce texted me on the way to my car. Just, "His face when you didn't engage. Incredible." Nolan tried to recruit Joel. Joel didn't bite. Nolan found me near the kitchen a few days later. No audience this time. That was deliberate on his part. "Look," he said quieter. "I'm not trying to start something. She's hurting." I said no, I replied. "You can at least talk to her." "No." He stared at me. "Why are you like this?" "Because it works," I said. "And because I don't negotiate with people who don't respect the answer they already got." He didn't have a response to that. Walked away. Later that week, Bryce told me something I hadn't known. Nolan had been feeding Renata information. Regular updates on my behavior at group events, what I said, who I talked to, whether I looked rattled, whether Isla's name had come up. He'd turned himself into an intelligence source for her campaign without ever being asked directly. Nobody had to ask. He built it voluntarily and called it loyalty. That's the interesting thing about guys who need to be useful to a woman they're interested in. They'll build the infrastructure themselves and never once question why they're doing it. When I thought about the manufactured run-ins, the coffee shop, the grocery store, I wondered how much of her accidental timing had come from Nolan knowing my patterns. Definitely some of it. Didn't matter. She had the receipts either way. Meanwhile, her group chat presence kept evolving. She graduated from vague emotional posts into something more calculated, dropping observations into unrelated threads that mapped clearly to her own situation, commenting on other people's relationship stuff with language that was obviously about her, thanking people for checking in without ever saying why they were checking in. No specific claim. Nothing you could push back on directly. People who didn't know me well started treating me with this particular cautious distance. Not hostile, just careful. Like someone had quietly flagged me as a person to be watchful around. I noticed it every time. I kept showing up. I kept building the file. I'll give her credit for the discipline. It was a tight operation. 3 weeks in, I was done being quiet about Isla. I'd held back for a few reasons. The case, her pace, the fact that neither of us needed to perform anything for it to be real. But watching Renata spend 3 weeks building a victimhood narrative while the actual truth just sat there unused in the background started to feel like a kind of dishonesty I wasn't okay with. I was genuinely in love with someone and had been for months. That information was available, and I'd been choosing not to use it. I called Isla on a Thursday night and walked her through the full sequence. Not to make her feel like a supporting character in someone else's mess, but because she needed to know before the noise got louder, and because I wasn't going to let Renata be the first person to put information about me in front of her. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she let a few seconds go by. "What do you actually want?" she asked. "To stop being quiet about us," I said. "I've been waiting 2 weeks for you to say that," she said. And that was that. We showed up to a Sunday afternoon group thing together the following weekend. Relaxed, present with each other, no announcement. We left together. The math was available if anyone wanted to run it. Renata was there. She clocked us walking in, and I watched the exact half second where her face reorganized before she put the composed version back up. She spent the first hour performing unbothered. Honestly, more disciplined than I expected. Then she came over. She extended her hand to Isla. "So nice to finally meet the mystery woman." Isla shook it. "Nice to meet you." Renata's smile stayed fixed. "So you'll make time for her, but not for me. Good to know where the priorities are." Isla blinked once. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Sure you are," Renata said, still smiling. "He's been complicated." I set my glass down. Stop. Renata looked at me like I'd offended her. Stop what? Stop talking to her like you're entitled to an opinion, I said. We were never a thing. You know that's not... Don't. Not here. She leaned toward Isla anyway. A private aside delivered loud enough to be heard. He does this. You'll figure it out. Isla held her gaze. Okay. That's all she gave her. Just, okay. Then she looked away. I put my hand on Isla's back and moved us across the room. Renata left 45 minutes later. We got burgers after. Didn't really talk about it much, which was fine. Something snapped in Renata that week. I don't know exactly what the trigger was, but what came next wasn't just more of the same. It was a different category of behavior entirely. Tuesday, Isla forwarded me a screenshot. Instagram DM from Renata. She'd found Isla through mutual follows from the group, which meant she'd gone looking specifically. The message opened warm. She just wanted to make sure Isla had the full picture before things went further. Said she and I had been essentially together for months before things shifted. Said she wouldn't feel right staying quiet because Isla deserved honesty from someone. Said she was reaching out woman to woman, not to cause problems. Every sentence was designed to look like concern. Every single one was a demolition attempt. The opening warmth was specifically there because a direct attack would have been easy to dismiss. She wanted the message to plant something, not explode something. She wanted Isla to read it twice and start wondering. Isla didn't respond to it. She screenshotted it, sent it to me, keeping you informed, and went back to whatever she'd been doing. The second message came 4 days later and dropped the warmth entirely. Called me by name in ways that implied history. Told Isla she was wasting her time on someone who didn't know what he wanted. Then came this phrase, you should ask him about, followed by deliberately nothing. Just a dangling implication with no specific claim attached, designed to plant suspicion that couldn't be addressed because it had never actually been stated. Then a line about what people who've known him a long time understood that Isla apparently didn't yet. And then, because that apparently wasn't enough. She's temporary. I'm the one who actually knows you. She'll figure that out when it matters. That last line was directed at me, in a message sent to Isla. Read it again if you want. Isla blocked her on every platform, saved both screenshots and sent them to me. Your problem to handle, she said. I trust you to handle it. No panic, no drama. Clean transfer of responsibility to the person she decided could be trusted with it. I added both screenshots to the folder on my laptop. I'd already been building it. The second arena opened 48 hours later. A colleague of mine, 3 years working alongside each other, solid judgment, someone whose read on situations I trust, forwarded me a LinkedIn message she'd received. Careful, professional language, concern about my conduct in a personal situation, pattern of behavior in relationships, felt it was important that people in my professional orbit were aware. Vague enough that there was no specific claim you could push back on. Targeted enough that the implication landed exactly where it was meant to. Here's the part that mattered. Renata had found her targets through a regional fire and safety professionals association we both belonged to. The member directory listed names and contact info for verified members in the field. She'd cross-referenced it to find people in my professional network, then hit them via LinkedIn using that information. LinkedIn was the delivery vehicle. The association's member directory was the targeting system. What she couldn't have known, what she had no way of knowing, was that one of the 3 people she'd pulled from that directory held a seat on the association's ethics committee. That person had the message within the same hour it arrived, knew exactly what category of conduct she was looking at, and forwarded it to the ethics board before I even knew the campaign existed. That's the thing about running a coordinated targeting operation through a professional membership database. The odds that nobody in the database has relevant institutional authority are not good. My colleague forwarded the message to me and said she wanted me to know before anything else developed. What I found out after everything was resolved, Renata hadn't sent one message. She'd sent variations of the same message to 3 separate people she'd identified in my professional orbit, all within the same 48-hour window. Strategy was to create the impression of multiple independent sources, raising similar concerns about the same person. 2 of the 3 recipients compared notes within hours, found the language was nearly identical, and came from the same account. And one of them, the ethics committee member, flagged it to the board on the grounds that she'd misused the member directory for personal messaging. The other went directly to my colleague. By the time I walked into Haas's office, 2 tracks were already converging on the same source. This is what happens when you run a smear campaign against someone who builds evidentiary timelines for a living. I went to investigator Haas and gave him the complete sequence from the beginning. Not because I was rattled, I wasn't, but because when someone brings a personal conflict into your professional lane, you get ahead of it immediately. Chain of command informed. Documentation in place before anyone else gets to establish the first version of events. The person who builds the clean record first controls the timeline. 8 years of watching what happens to people who wait. That's not being defensive. That's just protocol. Haas asked 2 questions. Documentation? Yes, I said. Witnesses? Yes. He told me to compile everything and said he'd be available for a more formal conversation when it was ready. Then, and this is the part I think about, he said, without elaborating much, that he'd seen this category of conduct before, and it didn't tend to go well for the person doing it. People who run this kind of campaign, he said, are usually banking on the target being too embarrassed or too conflict-averse to build a real record. They don't account for someone who does this for a living. That was the most accurate summary of the whole situation that anyone gave me in those 6 weeks. I spent the next 3 evenings building the full file. Complete timeline starting from the dinner and running through every event in sequence. My one response text to Renata, reproduced verbatim. The group chat activity Bryce had documented, with the timestamps showing she'd been at it since 11 p.m. the night of the dinner. Renata's 2 messages to Isla, first and second, with dates and platform. The message to my colleague, forwarded with her note attached. Documentation of the coordinated 3-message campaign. Bryce's pre-dinner screenshots. Her describing a developing situation with a serious man in the group, dated 4 months before the dinner, which made the timeline of her claimed relationship very clear. Joel's account of the dinner and what followed. Dated entries from my phone log of every manufactured encounter. I want to be honest about what that folder looked like when I was done with it. Not some dramatic pile of evidence. Just a clean document that told the same story from every angle you came at it from. You have to resist the urge to editorialize, to explain, to frame. Just put the dates and facts and documents in order and let them sit there. The facts were already damning on their own. They didn't need my help. When something happened, I logged it. Over 6 weeks, that folder stayed current. The night before the meeting, Isla came over. She didn't give me a pep talk or ask how I was feeling about it. She sat next to me on the couch with a book while I did a final review pass. When I finished, she asked if I wanted tea. I said yes. She made it. We talked about nothing in particular for a while, and then she went home. That was exactly the right thing. We both knew it. The formal conversation was held in a conference room at my office, with Haas facilitating. The association's ethics review had requested a documented account of events from all parties. That's what gave this meeting its structure. Renata came because non-participation would have been noted in the review, and she was still a member with standing to lose. Haas was there as my supervisor and as a witness to the formal process, not to the earlier events, which he knew only through the documentation. The outcome would be a written incident report submitted to the association, not a personnel file since she wasn't employed at my office. The authority here was the association's. I got there 12 minutes early. 2-page printed timeline in the same format I use for cause and origin reports. No emotion, just sequence and supporting evidence. Full file in a folder. USB drive with all the screenshot files. I set everything on my side of the table and waited. Renata came in like someone who expected to control the room. Composed, well-dressed, had a printed document of her own. I gave her credit for the prep, even knowing it was built on nothing solid. She made brief eye contact with me. I gave her a neutral nod and looked at Haas. He explained the format. Structured review of conduct that had entered the professional sphere. Everyone would speak. He asked Renata to go first. Haas folded his hands. Renata, do you have documentation of the signals you're describing? Texts, messages, anything written? It's not like that, she said. It was a pattern. The way we interacted over time. Anything written, Haas said. No, not formally. Haas nodded once and looked at me. Go ahead. I slid the timeline across the table. Walked through it the same way I walk through a cause and origin report. What happened? When? What documents back it up? The dinner. My one response text, read verbatim. The group chat campaign Bryce had documented. Renata's 2 messages to Isla, both read aloud in full, with dates. The message to my colleague. The coordinated 3-message campaign within the same 48-hour window. Bryce's pre-dinner screenshots from 4 months prior. Joel's account. The phone log. Renata tried to interrupt twice. Haas lifted one finger both times. Let him finish. At the end, I said no once, clearly, with reasons. Everything in this file was generated after that. I stopped talking. When Renata had the floor, the confident opener was gone. The messages to Isla weren't malicious, she said. She deserved to know. Those are your messages, I said. You're reducing my intentions. I'm not reducing anything. Those are your words. She said that was unfair. I didn't answer. Haas turned a page. You said you didn't intend to contact Isla. I was forced into it. Things had escalated. He tapped the first DM. This message came several days before the second. Before any escalation you've cited. What forced you into this one? She hesitated. She deserved to know. So you did intend to contact her. You're twisting my words. No, Haas said. I'm writing them down. He looked up. You said the LinkedIn outreach was one message to one person. Were there others? Her eyes moved sideways. She paused. 2 more, she said. Names, Haas said. She gave them. He wrote them down without comment. By 40 minutes in, she'd stopped advancing her story. She hadn't handled things well. She recognized she'd gone too far. She hoped everyone could move forward. Haas issued a written no-contact directive. No contact with me, no contact with Isla, no contact with anyone in my professional circle regarding this matter. The interaction was formally documented in an incident report. The association's ethics review concluded shortly after. Misuse of the member directory for personal harassment messaging. They placed a formal note on her membership record. The professional equivalent of a flag that lives in a file and shows up the next time it matters. Within 72 hours of the meeting, Renata was removed from the planning committee for an industry-adjacent networking event she'd spent 4 months organizing. The removal came from the event organizers, not from me. The association's ethics review had copied the organizers. She'd used the same planning committee channel to find some of her targets, which meant they now knew exactly how their network had been used. They were not happy about it. That was their word for it. Targets. Not my word. Theirs. I found out from my colleague, who mentioned it a few days later. Like it was just a fact she thought I'd want to know. This gets its own chapter because it's the part the group actually witnessed. About a week after the formal meeting, Renata posted in the chat. She'd apparently spent that week calculating whether word had filtered through the professional grapevine and decided the safest move was to get her version in front of people first. Coherent strategy, honestly. She just hadn't accounted for Bryce. Renata, I need people to know I've been dealing with something difficult. A lot has been taken out of context. I'd rather you hear my side from me. Bryce responded with 3 screenshots. The pre-dinner messages where Renata had described her developing situation with a serious man in the group, dated months before the dinner. One of the messages she'd sent to Isla, and his own typed account of what he'd witnessed at the rooftop dinner from 4 seats away. Then, I was at the dinner. I've been watching this for a month. Make of it what you want. I'm not discussing this further. The chat went quiet for almost an hour. 53 minutes. I was watching. Nobody defended Renata. Nobody told Bryce he was out of line. The screenshots just sat there, visible to everyone, and people made their own assessments in silence. Renata deleted her post within the hour. Then she went quiet for 4 days. When she came back, her energy was different. Shorter messages, no organizing activity, nothing group-wide. She was still in the chat. She just wasn't running it anymore. Over the following week, the group sorted itself out without anyone calling a meeting about it. Nolan's chat presence dropped to almost nothing. Joel texted me directly. I owe you a better assumption from the start, he said. I'm sorry it took this long. I told him he'd been working with incomplete information, and I didn't hold it against him. The people who'd been treating me with that particular cautious distance came back to normal, the shift quiet and undeclared. The 2 people who'd been loudest in the chat about being there for Renata through her difficult situation went nearly silent. One of them sent me a brief apology. I acknowledged it and moved on. What I noticed over the next 2 weeks was that Renata stopped getting included in plans before anyone officially decided to stop including her. Nobody voted on it. Nobody said anything. The group just quietly rerouted. Threads sent without her in them. Plans made in smaller groups she wasn't part of. The organizing infrastructure she'd spent 18 months building dissolved without anyone having to tear it down. People just stopped needing it from her. I mean, I've thought about that part a lot. She'd made herself the person everyone ran things through, and that position had real value, right up until it didn't. Once people had the actual picture, her version of things stopped filling the gaps. She'd built her whole position in that group on holding information and organizing things. Once the information was available to everyone, there was nothing left to hold. And nobody even had to be cruel about it. They just moved on. About a week after the meeting, I walked out of my building, and Renata was on the sidewalk outside. Whether it was planned or coincidence, I don't know. I didn't ask. She said my name. I didn't stop walking. Didn't slow down. Don't contact me again. She followed a few steps. I just want a minute. I kept moving. I'm sorry, don't, I said, still walking. I got to my car, got in, locked the door, and opened my phone. Blocked her number, blocked her Instagram, blocked her LinkedIn, blocked the secondary email she'd used to contact people in my professional circle. I'd had the list ready for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to close everything at once. Took about 90 seconds total. Then I drove away. I texted Isla. Done. She replied with a thumbs up and her address. I drove over. ate at her kitchen table while she told me about a patient she'd been working with for 14 months, a guy relearning how to do stairs after a serious spinal injury, who'd called her that afternoon just to say thank you. He'd taken his kid to a park for the first time in over a year and walked the whole trail without stopping. She got a little emotional telling it, the good kind, then laughed at herself, poured us both some water, and asked if I wanted to watch something. We watched something. I don't remember what. Something she'd already seen twice and didn't mention that part until it was halfway over. After that, I drove home. The directive wasn't a court order, but it had done its job. The professional lane was closed. Showing up on a public sidewalk was either coincidence or a final test to see if I'd re-engage. I didn't. I forwarded a brief note of the encounter to Haas for the incident record, then moved on. Renata didn't contact me again. Didn't contact Isla. Didn't contact anyone in my professional circle. But I'll be straight with you. I don't know what happened to her professionally after the association review concluded. Whether that flag on her membership account ever mattered in any concrete way, I genuinely don't know. That part wasn't mine to track. Real life doesn't always give you the clean ending. Sometimes it just stops, and you move on to the next thing. File closed. Edit. Yes, Isla knows this is posted. She read it, said it was accurate, corrected one detail. Apparently the leftovers were rice with vegetables, not pasta, and she says that distinction matters, and went back to her book. She's the most unbothered person I know, and I intend to keep her around for a long time. Nolan sent me a message about 10 days after everything settled. He said he recognized he'd been used as a tool, and that he respected how I handled myself throughout. I said I appreciated that. We moved on. No drama. We're not close, but we're square. For the people asking about the colleague who received the LinkedIn message, she's fine. She's been in professional spaces long enough to recognize exactly what that kind of message is. She was more annoyed that her name was used as a delivery mechanism than anything else. She handled it with considerably more grace than it deserved. Several people have asked whether I think Renata knew, on some level, that she was doing this deliberately, or whether she genuinely believed her own framing by the end. Honest answer, I don't know, and it stopped mattering to me before the meeting even started. When I'm investigating a fire, I don't need to know whether the person who started it meant to. I just need to know that they did, and be able to prove it cleanly. Motivation is someone else's job to analyze. Mine is just to get the origin and cause right. Got it right, file closed. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel, and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks.